Keanu Reeves once faced a moment so dark he was ready to give up on life, until a surprising phone call from Sandra Bullock changed everything. What happened that night has never been told before. Now, for the first time, Keanu reveals the untold story that moved the world to tears. What did Sandra do? Watch to find out. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The small podcast studio was softly lit, casting warm shadows over the two guests seated across from each other. Keanu Reeves sat relaxed but alert, wearing his usual simple black t-shirt and jeans. His gray-streaked hair framed his calm, thoughtful face. Opposite him, Sandra Bullock adjusted the water bottle beside her, her expression a mixture of quiet anticipation and a hint of nervousness that rarely showed in public. They were here to promote a joint project, a film that had drawn many fans eager to see them together again. The mood had been light at first, the kind of easy rapport expected from two longtime friends sharing stories from the set. The podcast host smiled warmly, guiding the conversation toward fun anecdotes, and the audience settled in for a familiar, entertaining interview. But as the conversation unfolded, something subtle shifted in the room. Keanu's eyes, usually so steady and serene, held a new depth. Sandra's usual animated energy softened, replaced by a quiet attentiveness. Their shared glance was brief but charged, as if both understood something unspoken was about to emerge. Keanu cleared his throat softly, his voice calm but carrying an unexpected weight. "People often ask us about the action scenes, the stunts, the chemistry we had on set," he began, looking briefly toward Sandra before continuing. "But there are moments in friendship that don't involve cameras or scripts, moments that change you in ways no one ever sees." Sandra nodded slowly, her eyes glistening just slightly. "Those moments stay with you, don't they?" she replied, voice low and steady. "They shape who you are, beyond the lights and cameras." The podcast host sensed the shift, too, their voice lowering in response. "It sounds like there's a story here that goes deeper than the usual behind-the-scenes tales," they said softly. Keanu gave a small, almost wistful smile. "Yes," he said, "there is. And it's something I've never shared publicly. It's a story about Sandra and me, about a moment I can't forget." Sandra's hands rested quietly in her lap, her eyes fixed on Keanu. "You don't have to share if it's too much," she said gently, concern evident in her tone. Keanu shook his head. "No, I want to. I've carried this for too long. It's time." The room seemed to still. The recording light glowed steadily, capturing every breath and word. The audience listened in silence, sensing that something profound was about to unfold. Keanu's voice softened. "Sandra saved my life once, and I don't think I've ever properly thanked her." Sandra's breath caught, her usual composure faltering for a moment. She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and tenderness. "Keanu," she began, but he held up a hand gently. "This isn't about praise or attention," he said quietly. "It's about what true friendship looks like when the world isn't watching." The air grew heavier, filled with unspoken emotions and years of shared history. For those listening, the line between two old friends and the deeper story that bound them blurred into something deeply human and real. Keanu paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. His fingers traced the rim of a coffee cup, now cold from forgotten sips. His eyes lowered briefly, then met Sandra's gaze again, steady and sincere. "This story isn't about our careers or the glitz of Hollywood," Keanu said softly. "It's about a time when I was at my lowest, and Sandra showed up in a way that no one else did, a way that saved me." Sandra's breath hitched quietly. She shifted slightly in her chair, the weight of his words settling over them both. The room felt smaller, more intimate, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Keanu continued, voice steady but edged with vulnerability. We had worked together years before, during Speed. That film brought us together. But this story is about what happened long after the cameras stopped rolling. Sandra nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. Her hands tightened briefly in her lap, a silent gesture of support. I was going through the darkest period of my life, Keanu said, voice almost a whisper now. Grief, loss, and a pain that nothing seemed to reach. Most people know about the tragedies, the loss of my daughter, River, my father leaving. But what they don't know is how close I came to giving up entirely. Sandra reached across the small space, placing her hand lightly on his. The simple touch spoke volumes. Years of friendship, trust, and shared pain. Keanu's voice faltered for a moment, but he pressed on. I was walking through life like a ghost, empty, lost. I had written letters to those I loved, made arrangements. I thought I was doing the responsible thing, but in truth, I was just tired of fighting. Sandra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She squeezed his hand gently, her own heart aching with the weight of his confession. And then, in the middle of that night, my phone rang, Keanu said, his voice growing steadier. It was Sandra. Sandra's own breath caught as she recalled the moment, the surprise clear on her face. Keanu smiled faintly, remembering the exact time. It was 2:17. She called, worried, because she'd had a dream about me. Sandra's voice was soft, almost trembling, as she added, I didn't know what else to do. I just knew I had to check. Keanu nodded. We weren't close like that anymore, just acquaintances who'd crossed paths at events. But her timing was perfect, impossible to ignore. He paused, looking directly at Sandra. That phone call changed everything. Sandra wiped a tear discreetly, the emotions from that night still vivid after all these years. Keanu's voice cracked slightly as he recalled how he almost hung up, overwhelmed by the coincidence in the timing. But I didn't. I stayed on the line, and I cried. For over an hour, Sandra listened without interruption. She didn't offer platitudes or quick fixes. She simply heard him. This isn't a Hollywood story, Keanu said quietly. It's the story of real kindness, real friendship, of showing up when it matters most. Sandra smiled faintly, eyes still moist. Sometimes listening is the most powerful thing you can do. Keanu nodded, the gratitude clear in his eyes. That night was the beginning of something I never expected. A journey back to life. The podcast studio remained quiet except for their voices. The usual chatter was replaced by something deeper, an unspoken bond between two friends who had weathered storms no one else saw. Keanu looked at Sandra with a mix of reverence and affection. That night marked a turning point for me. I realized that even in the darkest moments, someone's care could make all the difference. Sandra's gaze softened. It's easy to feel invisible when you're struggling, but sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to let you fade away. Keanu nodded slowly, the weight of years evident in his eyes. I want everyone listening to understand that kind of friendship, not the glamorous kind you see on screen, but the real kind, where someone shows up not for applause, but because they truly care. Sandra reached over and squeezed his hand. That's what this conversation is about. The power of connection, the kindness we don't often talk about. As they prepared to dive deeper into the story, the audience could feel the shift. This was no ordinary interview. It was a testament to human compassion and the moments that change lives forever. Keanu took a breath. There's more to tell, and it's a story I've kept for too long. Sandra nodded. We're ready. The podcast light glowed steadily as Keanu began the story that would move the world to tears. Keanu took a moment, his eyes reflecting years of memories. You know, when people think of Sandra and me, they picture the action, the stunts, the sparks on screen, he began. They imagine all the excitement from Speed, the adrenaline, the laughs, the chemistry. Sandra smiled softly, a gentle laugh escaping her lips. It's true, that film was intense, but it was also fun. Those days were full of energy and camaraderie. Keanu nodded, eyes warm with affection. But what most people don't see, what few get to know, is the friendship that grows in between the scenes. The moments that have nothing to do with scripts or cameras. Sandra's expression softened, her gaze steady and sincere. Those are the moments that build trust, that show you who someone really is. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. Over time, Sandra and I shared parts of ourselves that no one else witnessed. We became anchors for each other in a world that can often feel disconnected and superficial. Sandra nodded, eyes shining with understanding. It's easy to get lost in the Hollywood spotlight, but having someone who truly sees you, that makes all the difference. The podcast host watched quietly, sensing the shift from light entertainment to something profound. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for them to unfold more. Keanu took a deep breath. Our friendship has been a safe harbor during storms. Not just the ones we face publicly, but the silent battles we fight privately. Sandra reached over and brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. It's those silent battles that shape us. The grief, the loss, the moments when you feel invisible. Keanu's voice was steady but filled with emotion. Sandra has been there through all of that. Not just as a co-star or a friend on set, but as someone who showed up when it mattered most. Sandra's eyes glistened slightly, her hand resting lightly on the table. Sometimes it's the quietest gestures that carry the most weight. Keanu smiled faintly. People ask us about our chemistry, but it's not just what happens in front of the camera. It's the years of shared experiences, the trust that builds when someone stands beside you in your darkest hours. Sandra added, it's the kind of friendship that doesn't need to be explained. It's understood. The podcast host nodded thoughtfully. It sounds like your bond goes far beyond the public eye, a rare connection that many never get to witness. Keanu looked down for a moment, then back up. Exactly, and that's why this story is so important to me. It's about the power of genuine friendship, beyond fame and fortune. Sandra smiled gently. It's about being human with each other, flaws and all. The atmosphere in the room grew more intimate, charged with anticipation. Listeners felt they were being invited into a private space, a conversation meant not just for fans, but for anyone who has ever needed a friend. Keanu's voice softened. What we're about to share isn't easy, but it's real, and I hope it reminds people that connection can save lives. Sandra nodded, her expression steady. Sometimes the most meaningful stories are the ones we don't expect to tell. The quiet hum of the studio settled around them as they prepared to dive deeper into the story of friendship that had changed everything. Keanu paused, then spoke with a quiet intensity. People often focus on the big moments, the premieres, the awards, the headlines. But what really stays with me are the small, quiet times. The moments when someone just listens, without judgment. When they show up, not because it's convenient, but because it's necessary. Sandra's eyes held a softness that spoke of shared understanding. Those moments don't make the news, but they change everything. They remind you that you're not alone, even when you feel like you are. Keanu nodded slowly. There were times when I felt completely invisible, when the weight of loss and grief threatened to swallow me whole, and Sandra was there, not with advice or solutions, but simply with presence. Sandra's voice was gentle, filled with sincerity. Sometimes, what we need most is someone to bear witness to our pain, to hold space without trying to fix it. That's the truest form of friendship. The host leaned forward, intrigued by the depth unfolding. It sounds like your relationship has been a lifeline through some very difficult times. Keanu's gaze met Sandra's, gratitude shining through. It has. Friendship like this isn't built on convenience or publicity. It's forged in vulnerability and trust. It's about showing up when it's hard. Sandra smiled softly, and knowing that your friend will do the same for you. Keanu's tone grew more reflective. In Hollywood, it's easy to get caught up in image, to feel pressure to perform happiness, but true connection cuts through that. It's raw, imperfect, and deeply human. Sandra nodded, eyes misting slightly. That's why I'm grateful for this friendship. Because it's real. Because it saved me as much as it saved Keanu. Keanu smiled, a mix of humility and affection. We've shared laughter and tears, success and struggle. But what stands out is the constant presence, the knowing that someone cares enough to stay. Sandra's hand found Keanu's briefly, a silent affirmation. It's a bond that doesn't need words all the time. Sometimes just being there is enough. The podcast room felt charged with emotion. The listeners were drawn into a story not of fame or fortune, but of human resilience and compassion. Keanu's voice softened. I want people to understand that friendship isn't about grand gestures. It's about the quiet, consistent acts of love that happen when no one is watching. Sandra added, it's about recognizing that everyone carries burdens, and sometimes the best thing you can do is to simply show up. The host smiled warmly. Your story is a powerful reminder of what true friendship looks like. Keanu nodded. And it's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, connection can light the way. Sandra's eyes sparkled with tears of both sadness and hope. That light saved me. And it saved Keanu. The atmosphere grew more intimate, the anticipation building for the deeper story that was about to be shared. Keanu took a breath. What happened between us changed everything. And now, it's time to tell that story. Sandra shifted in her seat, her voice steady yet filled with warmth. The truth is, friendships like ours don't happen by accident. They require patience, understanding, and a willingness to be vulnerable. To let someone see your broken parts and still stay. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. We often hide our struggles behind smiles and roles. But it was in those hidden moments that Sandra showed me what it truly means to care. He paused, eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and solemnity. When people ask about our chemistry, the truth is, it's built on years of trust and being there for one another. Through the good times and the worst. Sandra smiled softly, her gaze never leaving his. That foundation of trust is what allowed us to be honest, even when it was hard. It's what gave me the courage to reach out when I sensed he was hurting. Keanu's voice lowered, almost reverent. And that reach changed everything. It saved me. The podcast host nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment. It's rare to hear such openness. Your friendship is a testament to the power of real human connection. Keanu looked at Sandra, a smile breaking through the seriousness. It's a story I'm proud to tell because it reminds me, and hopefully others, that we don't have to face our struggles alone. Sandra's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Sometimes, all it takes is one person showing up. One person who won't give up on you. The room seemed to exhale, the tension easing into a shared understanding. The listeners were no longer just audience members. They were witnesses to a powerful, true story. Keanu leaned back, his tone filled with quiet resolve. Our friendship has been a lifeline, and now I want to share what happened during that dark time, how Sandra's kindness became a beacon of hope. Good. Green asked Ian, downcast, for a... Sandra nodded, because sometimes friendship is the greatest act of courage. The podcast host smiled softly. Thank you both for sharing this. It's a story that will inspire so many. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a look filled with unspoken appreciation. The stage was set to reveal the story that would move the world to tears. The room fell into a heavy silence after Keanu's words. "Sandra, you saved my life once." The statement hung in the air, breaking the usual rhythm of their conversation. The weight of those words felt almost tangible. Sandra's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise and concern crossing her face. She looked at Keanu, searching for meaning beyond the simple sentence. The vulnerability in his voice was unlike anything she had heard from him before. Keanu's gaze met hers, steady and sincere. "I've never properly thanked you for it," he said quietly. "And I want to tell the world about it now." Sandra's hand twitched slightly, as if reaching to grasp a memory long buried. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The gravity of the moment was unlike anything they had shared publicly before. The podcast host leaned in, their curiosity piqued. "Keanu, would you share what happened? If you're comfortable." Keanu nodded slowly, the muscles in his jaw tightening briefly before relaxing. "It wasn't easy to share this before. It's a story about a dark time, a time when I was struggling more than most people knew." Sandra's eyes softened, her lips pressed into a thin line of support. "I was there, in my own way," she said softly. Keanu took a breath, then began to recount the story. "It happened years after we worked together on Speed. We had both moved on to other projects, other lives, but I was in a place I can barely describe." He paused, eyes momentarily distant. "I was going through the darkest period of my life. The pain felt unbearable. Loss had hollowed me out." Sandra reached over and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I remember those days," she said quietly. "I didn't know how to reach you, but I felt the distance." Keanu's voice dropped even lower. "Most people knew about the tragedies I faced. The loss of my daughter, River, the absence of my father. But what they didn't know was how close I came to giving up entirely." The silence that followed was profound. The walls of the studio seemed to close in, the recording light glowing steady but subdued. The listeners could almost feel the weight of those unspoken struggles. Keanu's hands clasped together on the table. "I had made arrangements, written letters to those I cared about. I was ready to say goodbye." Sandra's eyes glistened with tears as she listened, her own pain reflected in the soft lighting. "But then," Keanu continued, "something happened that changed everything." He looked directly at Sandra, the gratitude in his eyes unmistakable. "You showed up for me when no one else did." Keanu's voice softened as he continued. "It was late one night, really early in the morning, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but when I saw Sandra's name, something told me to pick up." Sandra shifted slightly, her eyes reflecting the memory. "I remember calling him that night. I'd had a dream, a feeling that something was wrong. I just had to check." Keanu nodded slowly. It was 2:17 a.m., a moment frozen in time. Sandra called, worried, and asked if I was okay. Her voice was calm but filled with concern. Sandra's gaze dropped briefly. "I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to be there, even if it was just over the phone." Keanu swallowed hard, his voice trembling slightly. "I was in such a dark place that night. The pain, the loneliness, it was crushing. I was ready to give in." Sandra's hand moved to rest gently on his. "I listened, really listened. No judgments, no advice, just being there." Keanu's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "That hour on the phone changed everything. I broke down, and for the first time in a long while, I felt seen." Sandra smiled softly. "Sometimes, just knowing someone cares is enough to hold on." Keanu nodded. "After I ran out of words, she said something I'll never forget. She told me she was coming over and asked me not to do anything until she arrived." Sandra's voice was steady but emotional. "I didn't hesitate. I left everything behind to be with him." Keanu's smile was fragile but real. That night, Sandra's kindness was a lifeline. It saved me. The room was still, the air thick with emotion. The listeners were drawn into this intimate moment, feeling the gravity of a friendship that transcended words. Sandra's eyes met Keanu's, their shared history shining through. It was more than friendship. It was love in its purest form. Keanu's voice was filled with reverence, and that love gave me a reason to keep going. The studio fell into a quiet reverence. Keanu's words lingered in the air, heavy with truth and vulnerability. The usual barriers of celebrity and performance dissolved, replaced by a raw, human connection that felt almost sacred. Sandra's eyes shimmered as she took a deep breath. That night wasn't just about a phone call or a visit, she said softly. It was about showing up when it mattered most, when it wasn't easy or convenient, when it was urgent. Keanu nodded, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't just come over, she brought light into my darkness. She stayed, baking cookies, making coffee, just being there. Sandra smiled through tears. Sometimes, it's the simplest acts that carry the greatest weight. Keanu looked out briefly, gathering strength. For years, I kept this story private. I didn't want to feel like a burden or to ask for sympathy, but now I want people to know that no one has to face their struggles alone. The podcast host's voice was gentle, filled with admiration. Thank you for sharing such a personal story, Keanu. It's a reminder of the power of friendship and compassion. Keanu's eyes met Sandra's, gratitude shining in their depths. Sandra's kindness saved my life, and I owe her more than words can say. Sandra reached across the table, taking his hand firmly. We're stronger together. That's the truth I want everyone to hear. As the recording light glowed steadily, the atmosphere was charged with hope and healing. This was not just a story of survival. It was a testament to the transformative power of human connection. Keanu's voice was steady and clear. If you're listening and feeling alone, remember this. Help can come in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes it starts with a phone call. Sandra smiled softly. Reach out, be there. You might just save a life. The podcast studio held its breath, carrying the weight of a story that would move the world to tears. Keanu leaned back slightly, his eyes reflecting a distant memory. It was years after Speed, he began slowly, when things started to change. Our paths diverged in ways we didn't expect. Sandra nodded, her gaze steady and full of empathy. We both moved on to different projects, different lives. The excitement of those early days felt like a distant memory. Keanu's voice lowered, carrying the weight of that time. Behind the scenes, away from the cameras, I was struggling. Grief and loss had taken root deep inside me. Sandra's hand rested lightly on the table, a silent gesture of support. It's easy to assume that success shields you from pain, but the truth is, it doesn't. Keanu sighed, the emotion clear in his tone. After losing River and facing other personal hardships, I felt a darkness creeping in. It wasn't something the public saw. Sandra's eyes softened. I remember hearing whispers, sensing that he was hurting, even if he didn't say it. Keanu continued, his words deliberate. I was battling depression, a quiet despair that isolated me. I felt like I was fading, losing myself. The podcast host watched intently, sensing the raw vulnerability unfolding. The studio's atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken pain. Keanu's voice grew softer, almost a whisper. There were days when getting out of bed felt impossible. When the grief was so overwhelming, it threatened to consume me entirely. Sandra's gaze never wavered. It's a loneliness that's hard to explain. Even surrounded by people, you can feel utterly alone. Keanu nodded slowly. I withdrew from the world, hiding behind a mask. I was scared to let anyone in. Sandra's voice was gentle. But sometimes the people closest to us sense what we won't say. They feel the cracks beneath the surface. Keanu smiled faintly, gratitude touching his eyes. Sandra was one of those people. Even when I pushed away, she stayed near. The room was quiet except for their voices, each word carrying the weight of lived experience. The audience was drawn into a moment of shared humanity. Keanu's expression grew somber. Those were some of the darkest days I've ever known. The pain wasn't just physical or emotional. It was spiritual. Sandra reached out briefly, her hand reassuring. It takes courage to face those shadows, and even more to let someone help. Keanu looked up, eyes meeting Sandra's with deep appreciation. That time defined so much of who I am today, and it's the reason I'm here telling this story. Sandra smiled softly, because no one should have to face their darkest moments alone. The stage was set for Keanu to reveal more of his journey through that difficult time, a story of resilience and hope amidst the shadows. Keanu's voice grew more reflective as he recounted those days. It was a struggle that no one could see. The smiles on the red carpet, the interviews, the movies, it was all a mask. Sandra nodded, her eyes full of understanding. It's a paradox of this world. You're surrounded by people, yet you can feel completely alone. Keanu sighed deeply. I'd walk through crowds feeling invisible, as if I were a ghost in my own life. The loss of River, the pain of my father leaving, those wounds ran deep. Sandra's voice softened. Grief is complicated. It doesn't follow a schedule or a timeline. Keanu's gaze dropped momentarily, then rose again with quiet determination. Depression was a constant companion. Some days I could fight it, others it felt like it was winning. Sandra reached out to touch his hand briefly, a wordless gesture of support. You weren't alone in that fight, even when it felt like it. Keanu looked at Sandra with gratitude. She was one of the few who truly understood. Even when I couldn't express what I was feeling, she sensed it. The podcast host listened intently, the raw honesty between the two friends filling the room with a palpable tension. Keanu continued, The isolation was crushing. I withdrew from friends, from the world. Sometimes I wondered if it would ever get better. Sandra's eyes glistened. It's hard to watch someone you care about suffer in silence. Keanu's voice cracked slightly. There were moments I thought about giving up, about ending the pain once and for all. Sandra's hand found his again, squeezing gently. But he didn't, because of the love and care of people who refused to let go. Keanu nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. That love came in many forms, but Sandra's presence was one of the most powerful. Sandra smiled warmly. It wasn't about fixing things. It was about being there, showing up. Keanu's tone grew stronger. That time taught me the value of true friendship, the kind that holds you steady when everything else feels like it's falling apart. The atmosphere was charged with emotion. The audience was not just hearing a story, they were witnessing a profound connection. Keanu's eyes glistened as he prepared to share what happened next. And that's when Sandra did something I'll never forget. Keanu took a deep breath, steadying himself as he prepared to reveal the turning point. It wasn't a grand gesture or a public declaration. It was simple, yet profound. Sandra's eyes met his, encouraging him to continue. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of a life, she added softly. Keanu nodded. During that darkest time, Sandra didn't try to fix me or offer advice. She just stayed nearby, steady and constant. He smiled faintly. She showed up without expectation, just presence. Sandra reached out, her hand resting gently over his. Because sometimes, presence is the greatest gift you can give. Keanu's voice grew filled with gratitude. Those moments gave me hope, reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I mattered. The podcast host leaned forward, their voice reverent. "It's clear that your friendship was a lifeline during those times." Keanu looked thoughtful. "It was, and it still is." Sandra smiled, eyes shimmering. "That time taught us both about the power of compassion, resilience, and true connection." Keanu nodded, his expression serious yet hopeful. "I want people to understand that no matter how dark it gets, there is light if you let someone in," Sandra added, "and that reaching out isn't a sign of weakness but of strength." The studio filled with a quiet warmth as they shared their reflections. The story was no longer just about hardship. It was about survival, friendship, and love. Keanu concluded, "What happened during those years shaped me, and it's why I'm telling this story now." Sandra smiled softly. "Because it's a story worth telling." The recording light glowed steadily, capturing a moment of honesty and hope that would resonate far beyond the podcast studio. Keanu's voice dropped as he began to describe the night that nearly broke him. "It was the darkest night I've ever known. Exhausted, isolated, mentally shattered." Sandra's eyes remained fixed on him, silent but fully present. Her expression showed deep empathy, understanding the gravity of what he was about to reveal. Keanu continued, "I had been battling the weight of grief and despair for months. The pain was relentless. It seeped into every part of me." He paused briefly, swallowing hard. "That night, I was so tired, not just physically, but of carrying the burden of loss and loneliness." The room seemed to hold its breath as Keanu spoke. His words were raw, filled with emotion that cut through the usual veneer of celebrity stories. "I had made arrangements, written letters to the people I loved," he said quietly. "Letters that I thought would be my final words." Sandra's hand tightened on the table, a silent gesture of solidarity as Keanu's voice grew heavier. "I was resigned," he admitted. "Resigned to the idea that maybe it was time to let go." His eyes searched the room, as if looking for understanding beyond the microphones. "I felt like I was disappearing, fading away from the world." Sandra's lips pressed together, tears threatening but held back. Her presence was steady, a quiet pillar amid the storm of Keanu's confession. Keanu's voice broke slightly. "The silence around me was deafening. The darkness so complete I thought it would swallow me whole." He described the physical sensations, the coldness of the night air, the stillness of the house, the heaviness in his chest. Every detail painted a vivid picture of his despair. Sandra listened without interruption, her silent support creating a safe space for Keanu's vulnerability. "I was alone with my thoughts," Keanu said, "and those thoughts were dark. I couldn't see a way out." His breath caught, the weight of his admission filling the room with an almost unbearable intensity. "I wanted to believe there was hope," he whispered, "but I couldn't feel it." The studio remained still, the gravity of the moment resonating with every listener. Keanu's eyes met Sandra's, gratitude shining through the pain. That night was the breaking point. The moment everything could have ended. Keanu's voice trembled slightly as he continued. "I had planned everything carefully. The letters I wrote were meant to explain, to say goodbye to the few people who mattered most. I wanted them to understand how lost I felt, why I thought this was the only way out." Sandra's eyes softened, her silent presence a quiet strength in the room. She understood that those letters were more than just words. They were a reflection of how deeply broken he was inside, a silent cry for help that hadn't been heard. Keanu's hands rested on the table, fingers intertwined as he recounted the overwhelming weight of that night. "I remember sitting alone in the dark, the house eerily quiet around me. The air was thick and still, like time itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come." He paused, taking a slow breath. "I was numb, but at the same time painfully aware of the crushing silence that surrounded me. It was as if the world had stopped, and I was trapped in that stillness." Sandra's gaze remained steady, offering unspoken comfort as she listened. Keanu's voice lowered, filled with raw honesty. I felt invisible, like my pain didn't matter to anyone. I was wrapped in a loneliness so deep it was suffocating. It wasn't just physical isolation. It was the emptiness inside that no one could reach. He described the sharp ache in his chest, the coldness that seeped into his bones, the relentless heaviness pressing down on his soul, making even the simplest breath a monumental effort. I had lost all energy, all hope. The light I once carried, the spark that had driven me through life's challenges, was flickering dangerously low, nearly extinguished. Sandra's hand lifted briefly, as if reaching across the distance to touch his pain, her silent support filling the space between them. Keanu looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I was so close to giving up. The thought of ending it all felt like a release, a relief from the unbearable weight I was carrying. His voice cracked as he spoke the words aloud, the confession raw and unfiltered, breaking the barrier between public figure and vulnerable man. But even in that darkness, something held me back. Something deep inside whispered that my story wasn't finished, that there was still a chance I didn't see yet. Sandra's presence was unwavering, a steady anchor in the storm of his despair. Keanu's breath hitched as he described the fragile thread of hope that remained, barely visible but powerful enough to hold on to. That faint flicker of light, it was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to keep me tethered to life. That night wasn't just a battle between despair and hope, he said, voice thick with emotion. It was the hardest fight I've ever faced. The fight to stay alive when everything inside me wanted to give up. The podcast studio was silent except for their voices, the tension thick and electric, every listener hanging on to his every word. Keanu's eyes found Sandra's once more, his gratitude unmistakable. And that's when you reached out? Sandra shifted slightly, her eyes filled with quiet compassion. That moment, hearing his voice like that, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I knew something was terribly wrong. Keanu nodded slowly, the memory vivid and raw. I was barely holding on. And yet, she didn't hesitate. She reached out, not with judgment or pity, but with genuine care. His voice softened. That night, Sandra became my lifeline. It wasn't just a call or a visit. It was the beginning of a rescue that saved me. Sandra's hands rested gently on the table as she reflected. Sometimes showing up is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most important. Keanu smiled faintly, a mix of gratitude and awe in his eyes. She showed up in ways I didn't know I needed, with kindness, patience, and unwavering presence. The room was charged with emotion as Keanu spoke. That night, I realized I wasn't alone, that someone cared enough to stay. Sandra's voice was soft but firm. It's a reminder that we all need someone to hold space for us, especially when we're at our lowest. Keanu's gaze met hers with deep appreciation. Her presence gave me hope when hope felt impossible. He leaned forward slightly, voice steady. And it's that hope that kept me going, that kept me fighting. Sandra smiled warmly. Because sometimes the smallest light can guide you through the darkest night. Keanu nodded. That night marked a turning point, a moment where despair met compassion and life won. The podcast host spoke quietly, moved by their story. Thank you for sharing something so personal and powerful. Keanu looked thoughtful. It's not just my story. It's a story about friendship, resilience, and the power of human connection. It's like, Sandra added softly, and about the importance of being there for one another, no matter what. The recording light glowed steadily, capturing a moment of honesty and hope that would resonate with listeners long after the podcast ended. Keanu's voice softened as he recalled that fateful moment. It was 2:17 a.m. when my phone rang. I wasn't expecting any calls that night, or any night. I was ready to give up, to let the darkness take over. Sandra's face was solemn, her eyes reflecting the weight of the memory. I didn't know what was happening, but I had a dream, a feeling that something was wrong with Keanu. I couldn't ignore it. Keanu smiled faintly, almost amazed by the coincidence. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to keep the silence, to disappear completely. But then I moved completely. Sandra's voice was steady as she spoke about her own hesitation. I worried about waking him. I worried I was overstepping, but something told me I had to call. Keanu nodded slowly. When I heard her voice, calm but filled with concern, it shook me. She asked, "Are you okay?" Sandra's eyes glistened with tears. I said it simply but from my heart. I told him about the dream, and that I was worried. Keanu's voice cracked slightly as he continued. I was overwhelmed. The timing was almost unbelievable. Here she was, reaching out in the middle of the night when I was at my lowest. Sandra smiled through tears. Sometimes, the universe sends us signals we can't explain. Keanu recalled the moment he nearly ended the call. I almost hung up. It felt like a joke, like fate was playing with me. Sandra's presence was steady as ever. But I kept talking. I told him I was there, no matter what. Keanu's voice grew stronger. That call was a lifeline. It pulled me back from the edge. The studio was silent, except for their voices, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Keanu looked at Sandra with deep gratitude. That night changed everything. It was the beginning of my return. Sandra nodded. It was the moment hope found a way back in. Keanu's voice softened as he continued. When Sandra called, I was barely holding on. The pain was overwhelming, the silence around me suffocating. Every breath felt heavy, like I was drowning in my own thoughts. Sandra's eyes reflected her own memories, her face tender with empathy. I remember feeling scared, uncertain of what I would hear or how he might respond, but I knew I had to call. Keanu nodded slowly, the weight of that night pressing through his words. Her voice was like a lifeline thrown in the darkness. She didn't rush me, didn't try to fix anything. She just listened. Really listened. Sandra's expression softened, her voice calm and sure. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply be there. To hold space, without judgment or expectation. Keanu swallowed hard, his voice catching as he recalled that moment. I broke down. For the first time in a long time, I let my guard down. I told her everything. The despair, the hopelessness, the emptiness that had consumed me for so long. Sandra's hand lifted briefly as if reaching through the air to offer comfort, though none was needed here. I stayed with him. I wasn't sure what to say, but I knew I couldn't leave him alone. Keanu's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That call lasted over an hour filled with honesty, pain, and connection. I spoke, and she stayed silent, steady, patient. The podcast host listened intently, moved by the depth and rawness of the story unfolding. Keanu looked at Sandra with deep gratitude. That night, something shifted inside me. I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought, that someone cared enough to stay. Sandra nodded, her voice soft but firm. And sometimes, realizing you're not alone is the first step toward healing. Keanu's tone grew more resolute. Her timing was nothing short of miraculous. In that moment, hope found a way back in. Sandra smiled gently. It was a moment of grace, of intervention that changed everything. The atmosphere in the room was charged with emotion, the listeners hanging on every word, feeling the fragile light breaking through the darkness. Keanu concluded softly, "That phone call was the turning point, the moment where despair met compassion and everything began to change." Keanu's voice grew steady as he reflected on what came next. After that call, everything shifted. I wasn't alone anymore, even in the darkest hours. The isolation that had gripped me began to loosen, just a little at first, but enough to make a difference. Sandra's eyes held a tender light as she added, "It was the first step in a journey back toward life, a moment where hope began to flicker, faint but real." Keanu smiled faintly, the memory bittersweet. That phone call wasn't just a moment in time. It was a lifeline, extended across the silence, a bridge that connected me back to the world. He looked at Sandra with deep appreciation. Her willingness to reach out, to listen without judgment or impatience, saved me in ways words can't fully express. Sandra's voice was soft but filled with strength. Sometimes all it takes is one person to say, "I'm here. You don't have to face this alone." The podcast studio was quiet except for their voices, the emotion palpable in the stillness. The listeners could feel the gravity of the connection shared between two friends who had weathered the darkest storms. Keanu continued, "From that night on, a bond deepened between us. It wasn't just the friendship from the past anymore. It became a lifeline forged through survival, vulnerability, and hope." Sandra nodded, eyes shining with emotion. "It showed me the true power of presence, of simply being there without trying to fix, judge, or rush." Keanu's tone was hopeful and resolute, and it reminded me that even when everything feels lost and hopeless, connection can bring you back. It can light the way through the darkest nights. Sandra smiled warmly, her voice carrying the weight of years of understanding. That call was the beginning of healing, not a quick fix, but the first step toward rebuilding. Keanu concluded with a gentle, heartfelt message. If you're listening and struggling, feeling invisible or alone, remember this: someone cares. Sometimes that someone is closer than you think. They're willing to reach out, to listen, and to hold space for you. The recording light glowed steadily, capturing a moment of profound honesty and hope that would resonate far beyond the walls of the podcast studio, touching the hearts of countless listeners. Keanu's voice grew quieter as he began to describe that long, lonely night. When Sandra called, I was drowning in my own thoughts. The pain, grief, and hopelessness all poured out of me in a torrent I hadn't been able to stop for so long. Sandra listened intently, her presence steady and unwavering. She said nothing, simply offering the space Keanu needed to unravel the pain inside him. Keanu continued, I didn't hold back. I told her about the emptiness inside, the crushing weight of loss that pressed on me every day like a stone. His words came slowly, raw and unfiltered. I spoke of River, my daughter, and the heartbreak that followed her passing. The years of sorrow that shadowed everything afterward. Sandra's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her silent empathy in that moment spoke louder than any words could. Keanu's voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. I told her about my father leaving, the sense of abandonment that haunted me through the years, the way it made me question my place in the world. He paused, breathing deeply, as if drawing strength from the memory. And the loneliness, the deep, aching loneliness, the feeling that no one really saw me, that I was invisible beneath the pain. Sandra reached out and gently squeezed his hand, a simple act of compassion that conveyed more than any sentence could. Keanu smiled faintly, a soft light in his eyes. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix me or offer solutions. She just listened, fully and patiently. Her patient presence was a lifeline that held him steady when everything inside was breaking. Sometimes, she said softly, all someone needs is to be truly heard. Keanu nodded slowly. That night, her listening was the most powerful gift anyone had ever given me. The podcast studio was quiet except for their voices, the weight of Keanu's confession filling the room with a profound stillness. Keanu's eyes met Sandra's, filled with deep gratitude. Being truly heard and seen, It changed everything for me. Sandra smiled gently. It's a gift we often overlook in our lives. Keanu's tone grew stronger with conviction. Her compassion gave me hope, a reason to keep going when I thought all hope was gone. Keanu took a slow breath, his voice steady yet heavy with emotion. For over an hour I poured everything out. The fears that clawed at my mind, the regrets I carried deep inside, and the crushing weight of sorrow that settled over me like a storm. Sandra sat silently beside him, her presence unwavering. She never interrupted, never tried to steer the conversation. Instead, she held the space open, a safe harbor in the tempest of his pain. Keanu's eyes glistened as he recalled that night. I spoke about the endless nights spent wrestling with memories, about how the silence around me sometimes felt like a prison, cold and suffocating. He explained how for so long he had worn a mask of calm and strength, hiding the turmoil beneath, afraid that revealing his true feelings would make him appear weak or unworthy. Sandra's expression was tender, filled with quiet admiration. I could hear the pain in his voice, but even more, I could feel the courage it took for him to finally share it. Keanu's voice cracked slightly as he admitted, "That night wasn't just a confession, it was a release. I finally let go of the burden I'd been carrying alone for so long." Sandra nodded gently, her voice soft but resolute. "And I was there with him, not to fix, not to judge, but simply to be present, to hold space for his truth." Keanu smiled faintly, warmth breaking through the heaviness. "That kind of presence is rare, more healing than any advice or therapy." The podcast host leaned in, captivated by the depth of the story. It's incredible to realize how powerful simply listening can be. Keanu looked at Sandra with deep appreciation. She showed me what it truly means to be seen, to have someone witness your pain and not turn away. Sandra's voice carried certainty. Being heard is a form of validation. It says your pain matters, you matter. Keanu's tone grew hopeful. That night planted the first seed of healing. It reminded me I wasn't invisible. Sandra added softly, "Sometimes that's all it takes. One person to simply listen, to show they care." The studio filled with a quiet reverence, the listeners drawn into a moment of shared humanity and vulnerability. Keanu concluded softly, "That night changed everything, because finally I felt seen, and that gave me the strength to keep fighting." Keanu's voice grew steady with conviction as he reflected on the lasting impact of that night. After that long call, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a cure, but it was the start of something new, a fragile hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. Sandra's eyes shone with understanding as she spoke softly. It was a moment of real connection, a reminder that none of us has to face our darkest moments alone, that even in the silence, someone can reach across and pull you back. Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful and grateful. That night, I learned the true power of being heard. Not just hearing words, but feeling truly seen, validated, and accepted. That someone believed I mattered, even when I couldn't believe it myself. Sandra smiled gently, her voice filled with warmth. It's a gift to be allowed to be vulnerable without fear. To have someone stay, to witness your pain with compassion instead of judgment. Keanu looked at her with deep gratitude. That kind of presence saved me. It gave me the courage to begin healing, even when the path ahead seemed impossible. It reminded me that I wasn't invisible. The podcast host leaned forward, visibly moved by the raw honesty shared between two lifelong friends. Your story is a powerful testament to friendship's ability to heal wounds that nothing else can. Keanu's voice carried warmth and hope. It reminded me that recovery isn't a straight path. It's messy, slow, and often invisible. But connection makes it possible. The simplest act of listening can be revolutionary. Sandra added, And sometimes the greatest healing comes simply from knowing someone is there, willing to listen, willing to sit with you in the darkness. Keanu smiled softly, a light returning to his eyes. That night taught me to value presence over words, compassion over solutions. That sometimes silence and company are more healing than any advice. Sandra's eyes glistened as she said, "It's a lesson we all need to remember. That being there for someone, truly there, can make all the difference." The studio was filled with a quiet reverence, the listeners touched by the depth of love, understanding, and humanity shared in those moments. Keanu concluded with gentle strength. If you're struggling, if you feel unseen or unheard, remember this: you don't have to carry it alone. There is power in being truly heard, and there are people who want to listen. Sandra nodded, her voice warm and encouraging. And for those listening, don't underestimate the impact of showing up, even when it's hard. Sometimes that's exactly what someone needs to keep going. The recording light glowed steadily, capturing a moment of profound humanity and hope that would resonate far beyond the walls of the podcast studio, reaching into the hearts of countless listeners worldwide. The silence stretched between them as Keanu's words finally faded. He had spoken his pain, his darkest fears laid bare in the quiet of the night. For a moment, nothing more was said. The weight of what had just been shared seemed to fill the space around them, thick and palpable. Then Sandra broke the silence with a soft yet resolute voice. "Keanu, I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there." Her words carried an urgency, a promise that cut through the heaviness like a beacon. Keanu looked at her, surprised by the firmness in her tone. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, his vulnerability still raw. "It's late. You have your own life, your own schedule." Sandra didn't hesitate. "It doesn't matter. Nothing matters more than you right now." Her voice was gentle but determined. She was willing to set aside her own rest, her own comfort, to be there for him. The gravity of that moment settled deeply. To leave everything behind in the middle of the night to support a friend was no small thing. It was an act of love, a risk taken not lightly, but with full heart. Sandra reflected on her own fears in that moment. The uncertainty of what she would find, the quiet dread that the worst might be true. But alongside the fear was an even stronger sense of purpose, the need to be there no matter what. "I remember hanging up the phone and feeling a mix of dread and determination," she said. "I didn't know what I'd walk into, but I couldn't ignore that call. I had to act." For Keanu, hearing those words again brought a rush of emotion. Knowing she was coming gave me a lifeline, a reason to hold on. It was the first light in a very dark tunnel. The tension in the story thickened as the listeners imagined Sandra racing through the night, driven by a fierce love and worry for her friend. Every minute mattered, every moment stretched with the uncertainty of what awaited. Sandra's journey through the night wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual. The simple act of deciding to show up became a profound statement of hope and humanity. As she drove, the city around her was quiet, the streets empty but for the soft glow of streetlights. Her mind raced with thoughts of Keanu. Was he safe? Was he still holding on? The distance between them felt immense, and yet bridged by that unbreakable thread of friendship. Her promise was more than words. It was a commitment to not let him face his darkness alone. For Keanu, every passing minute was a test of endurance, clinging to that promise like a lifeboat. The phone call had given him a reason to wait, a reason to fight. The story, in that moment, was not just about two people. It was about the power of presence and the courage it takes to be there when it matters most. Sandra's determination only grew stronger as she made her way through the quiet streets. The world outside was asleep, unaware of the urgency pulsing through her veins. Every second felt precious, every moment weighted with the responsibility she had taken upon herself. Her mind wandered back to that phone call, the fragility in Keanu's voice, the crack in his strength. It all lingered like a haunting melody. She knew that if she didn't act now, the consequences could be irreversible. Despite the exhaustion clawing at her own body, she refused to slow down. Her heart demanded that she get to him, to be the steady presence he desperately needed. Sleep and comfort were secondary to this mission of compassion. She worried about the long night ahead. The thought of leaving behind her own sanctuary, her bed, and the routine of her life was daunting. But nothing could compare to the fear of not showing up when it mattered most. Sandra recalled the internal battle between fear and resolve, the fear of what she might find, the unknown depths of Keanu's pain, was terrifying, yet the resolve to be there for a friend outweighed every hesitation. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale with tension. Each mile she covered was a promise kept, a silent vow to be the light in his darkest hour. Meanwhile, Keanu sat in the stillness of his home, the weight of the night pressing down on him. The knowledge that Sandra was coming gave him a fragile anchor in a sea of despair. He described the mix of emotions that coursed through him: fear, relief, hope, and exhaustion. The promise of her arrival was a beacon, a reminder that he was not alone. The suspense built as the night wore on, time slowing with each passing minute. The listeners could feel the intensity, the urgency, the fragile hope hanging in the balance. Sandra's journey was more than a physical act. It was a profound expression of love and courage. To risk her own rest, to step into the unknown for someone else, spoke volumes about the depth of their friendship. As she neared his home, every heartbeat echoed the gravity of the moment. Her mind raced, wondering how she could help, what she could say, how she could hold him when words would fail. Keanu prepared himself to face whatever came, knowing that the promise made on the phone was real. The waiting was agonizing, but filled with a quiet anticipation. Together, in those few miles and minutes, two friends were bound by an unbreakable thread, a promise that would change everything. The night air was crisp as Sandra finally pulled up to Keanu's house. The quiet streets seemed to hold their breath, mirroring the tension that filled her heart. She sat for a moment in the car, gathering herself, knowing that what came next was more than just a visit. It was an act of deep love and courage. She recalled the weight of her promise, leaving behind the comfort of her own home, the warmth of her bed. To step into the unknown for a friend was a risk she took willingly. It was a choice made out of compassion, urgency, and a refusal to let fear keep her from doing what was right. With a steady hand, she reached out and pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed softly in the stillness. Moments later, the door opened and Keanu appeared, eyes wide but grateful. There was no need for words at first. Sandra stepped inside, her presence a calming balm to the storm raging within him. She didn't ask questions or seek explanations. She simply held space, offering silent support. Together, they moved through the night in quiet companionship. Sandra made coffee, the aroma filling the room with a sense of normalcy and comfort. She began to bake cookies, a simple act that became a powerful symbol of care and healing. Keanu watched, overwhelmed by the tenderness of the moment. The kitchen, once a place of solitude and darkness, was transformed by the warmth of friendship and the small miracles of kindness. Sandra's determination to stay, to be present, was a lifeline. She knew that healing wouldn't come from grand gestures or quick fixes, but from steady, compassionate presence. As dawn approached, the night's weight began to lift. Keanu felt a flicker of hope rekindled within him, a fragile but real light breaking through the darkness. Sandra's courage and love had not only reached him in his darkest hour, but had also laid the foundation for the healing journey ahead. The promise she made on the phone, to come over and not leave him alone, became a turning point, a testament to the power of true friendship. Her story, filled with suspense and tenderness, was a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound acts of love are the simplest ones. Showing up when it matters most. Sandra pulled into the all-night grocery store, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead as she stepped inside. The air was cool and filled with the subtle hum of refrigerators and the distant murmur of late-night shoppers. It was far from glamorous, but in that quiet store, every choice she made carried a deeper meaning. She moved through the aisles methodically, reaching for the essentials: flour, sugar, real butter, ingredients for chocolate chip cookies, made from scratch. Not the pre-made dough that was quick and easy, but the kind that required time and care. Each item was a symbol, a gesture of grounding and love. Sandra's hands brushed over the packages of coffee beans, selecting the kind that needed to be freshly ground. She knew the smell, the rich, bitter aroma, would fill the kitchen with comfort and familiarity. It was a small detail, but to her it mattered. Next, she gathered eggs, bacon, and pancake mix, the fixings for a proper breakfast. The sounds of the store, the beep of scanners, the shuffle of feet, mixed with her thoughts. This simple grocery run was a mission, an act of care that went beyond the items in her cart. As she moved through the store, she thought about Keanu, about the darkness he was facing, and how these small, tangible acts could bring a sense of normalcy and warmth to a night that felt anything but. The textures, the cold metal of the shopping cart, the smoothness of the glass coffee container, the softness of the flour bag, grounded her in the moment. It was a quiet ritual of love, a way to show up even when words fell short. She paused briefly by the cookie ingredients, imagining the sound of the dough being mixed, the smell of baking, filling a quiet house. It was more than baking. It was a promise of presence, a tangible expression of hope. Every choice she made was thoughtful, deliberate, each item a piece of a larger act of compassion. She knew these small comforts could break through the darkness in ways bigger gestures might not. Keanu's face came to her mind, how he would look when she arrived, how the smell of fresh coffee and cookies might stir something forgotten inside him. It was this thought that kept her moving, kept her going despite the hour and the weight of the moment. She made her way to the checkout, the cashier's tired smile a reminder of the world continuing on outside this intimate story. She paid quietly, then headed back to the car, the groceries cradled carefully in her arms. The night was still dark as she drove the last miles to Keanu's house. The city's lights blurred past, but inside her heart, the simple act of gathering these ingredients felt like the most important thing she'd done in a long time. The drive back to Keanu's house was quiet except for the soft hum of the car's engine and the occasional rustle of the grocery bags beside Sandra. Each item inside felt heavier with meaning than their simple weight suggested. These weren't just ingredients, they were fragments of hope, small pieces of normal life that could help anchor someone drowning in darkness. Sandra's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel as she let her mind wander to the scenes that awaited her. She imagined the rich, intoxicating aroma of coffee beans freshly ground, filling the air and stirring sleepy senses awake. The scent alone had the power to soothe and comfort, wrapping the space in warmth. Her thoughts moved to the chocolate chip cookies she would soon bake. The soft dough studded with melted pockets of chocolate would transform the cold kitchen into a haven of sweetness. The gentle crackle of the oven timer, the sight of golden cookies cooling on the rack, these simple moments carried a quiet magic. Sandra pictured herself mixing the dough carefully, the texture of the flour sifting through her fingers, the buttery smoothness as she folded it in. She could almost hear the wooden spoon scraping rhythmically against the mixing bowl, a sound so ordinary, yet in this context, profoundly healing. She thought about the sound of bacon sizzling on the stove, the tiny pops and crackles a comforting rhythm in the quiet night. The soft stack of pancakes, fluffy and warm, would be a simple but powerful gesture of care. These sensory details were more than just comforting. They were grounding. In a night overshadowed by pain and despair, the rituals of cooking and sharing food could create a fragile space, where the harshness of reality might momentarily soften. Sandra's mind drifted to the moment she would walk into Keanu's kitchen. She imagined his face, tired but brightening at the smell of coffee brewing, the warmth that filled the room not just from the oven, but from being seen and cared for. She thought of how the sound of laughter replacing silence, the simple act of breaking bread together, could help stitch together the frayed edges of a broken spirit. The city lights flickered past the car window as Sandra felt a deep connection to this act of kindness. It wasn't dramatic or grandiose. It was quiet, steady, and profoundly human. It was love in its purest form, showing up, offering comfort, and creating space for healing. Pulling into the driveway, she took a slow, grounding breath. The cool night air kissed her skin, a reminder that despite the darkness, there was still light and possibility ahead. Sandra gathered the bags carefully, each item a symbol of the turning point she was about to help create. They were humble beginnings, but powerful ones. A tangible reminder that even in the bleakest times, small acts of love can spark hope. She smiled softly, feeling ready to bring warmth, comfort, and presence to a friend who needed it more than words could say. Sandra stepped through the door carrying the groceries with care, the soft rustle of bags blending with the stillness of the early morning. The house was quiet, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with warmth and light. Every item she brought inside was more than nourishment. It was a symbol of presence, an unspoken message of hope. She set the bags down gently on the kitchen counter, the smooth surfaces cool beneath her fingertips. The flour sack felt soft and familiar, a comforting texture that grounded her. The bag of coffee beans, heavy with promise, was next, soon to release a rich aroma that could pierce through the darkness. As she unpacked the eggs, bacon, and pancake mix, the scents began to mingle subtly, layering together in a quiet symphony of comfort. The sizzle of bacon soon filled the kitchen, mingling with the gentle bubbling of coffee being brewed fresh. These sounds, simple and everyday, became acts of love, transforming the space. Sandra glanced toward the living room, where Keanu sat quietly, his eyes tired but attentive. She could see the faint flicker of something tender in his expression, a trace of relief, perhaps, or the fragile stirrings of hope. She began mixing the cookie dough, the soft pat of butter against the bowl and the occasional scrape of the spoon punctuating the stillness. The tactile nature of baking grounded her, turning care into action. The smell of melting chocolate mingled with warm vanilla, filling the room with a scent that spoke of home and healing. Keanu watched quietly, admiring the thoughtfulness behind every choice Sandra had made. Each ingredient, each gesture felt deliberate, a beacon of compassion in the night. The kitchen light cast a warm glow, softening the shadows and wrapping them both in a cocoon of quiet intimacy. The hum of normal life, the ticking clock, the whisper of the oven timer offered a soothing rhythm against the backdrop of pain. As cookies baked and coffee steamed, the atmosphere shifted. The house, once heavy with silence, began to pulse with a gentle energy. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could find a way in. Sandra smiled softly, knowing these simple acts were more than comfort, they were the foundation of healing. The sensory details, the smells, sounds, and textures were touchstones, anchors in the storm. For Keanu, the night was no longer just a struggle, it became a space of possibility, where care and presence wove together to create hope. The first light of dawn was just beginning to touch the sky when Sandra quietly stepped into Keanu's home. The house was still, heavy with the silence that had settled over it for too long. Without a word, she crossed the room and wrapped him in a gentle, steady hug. It was an embrace that needed no explanation, carrying years of friendship and the urgency of that moment. Keanu leaned into her, drawing strength from the warmth of the contact. In that simple act, a fragile thread of hope began to weave itself through the darkness that had enveloped him. The hug spoke of presence, of a promise kept without fanfare or ceremony. Sandra gently pulled back, a soft smile touching her lips as she moved to the kitchen. She set to work with quiet determination, unpacking the groceries with care. The familiar motions, mixing, stirring, chopping, became acts of love, grounding both of them in the simple rhythms of life. The scent of freshly ground coffee beans soon filled the air, rich and inviting, cutting through the stillness like a whispered invitation to awaken. The coffee brewed slowly, a warm promise of comfort and connection. As the oven warmed, Sandra mixed the cookie dough, the soft pat of butter and the sweet scent of vanilla and chocolate filling the kitchen. Each fold of the batter was deliberate, a meditation in motion, a tangible expression of care. Keanu watched quietly, his gaze tracing the familiar motions with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. The kitchen, once cold and empty, began to glow with a gentle light. The ordinary sounds, the clink of utensils, the hum of the oven, became a sacred soundtrack, weaving a cocoon of healing around them. Sandra moved effortlessly from baking to cooking breakfast, frying bacon, flipping pancakes, and cracking eggs. The sizzling sounds, the warmth of the stove, and the growing aroma of breakfast transformed the space. Life was returning, not with grand gestures, but through the steady pulse of everyday care. Keanu inhaled deeply, the smells stirring something long buried, a memory of simpler, kinder times. The contrast between the darkness he'd felt and the warmth Sandra brought was stark and profound. It was as if the kitchen itself had become a sanctuary, a place where despair slowly gave way to hope. The early morning light filtered softly through the windows, casting a golden glow that mingled with the rich aromas. The house, once heavy with silence, now hummed with quiet life. Sandra's presence filled the room with calm and strength. Her focus was on the moment, on the act of healing that was unfolding not just in the food, but in the shared space between them. Keanu's heart began to shift. The heaviness in his chest eased, replaced by a flicker of something new, a fragile but real warmth. The simple act of sharing this space, of being seen and cared for, began to chip away at the shadows. This was more than baking cookies or making coffee. It was the beginning of reclaiming life, of stitching together broken pieces with the threads of kindness and presence. The kitchen, with its sounds, smells, and light, became a sanctuary where healing could quietly take root. As the morning unfolded, the kitchen transformed into a sanctuary of healing and comfort. The warm golden light from the rising sun seeped through the windows, casting gentle shadows across the counters and illuminating the subtle steam rising from the freshly brewed coffee. Sandra moved with calm assurance, her every gesture deliberate and tender. She slid the first batch of chocolate chip cookies into the oven, the rich scent of vanilla and melting chocolate soon beginning to fill the air. The smell was comforting, a sensory thread weaving warmth into the quiet room. Keanu sat nearby, watching her with a quiet reverence. The contrast between the heavy darkness he had carried and the gentle light Sandra brought was stark. The kitchen was no longer just a room. It had become a sacred space where life and hope slowly began to return. Sandra flipped pancakes with practiced ease, the soft sizzle and golden hue a stark contrast to the silence that had gripped Keanu's home. She placed the crispy bacon on a plate, the rich aroma mingling with the other smells, wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. Every sound, every scent, every texture became a small miracle, grounding them both in the present and soothing the wounds of the past. Keanu took a deep breath, allowing the warmth of the kitchen and the kindness surrounding him to seep into his bones. The oppressive weight of despair loosened its grip, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. Sandra glanced over at him, her eyes soft with care and understanding. Without words, they shared a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them here and the path ahead. The normalcy of the morning routine, the clinking of dishes, the hum of the coffee maker, The gentle laughter that eventually escaped between them wove a tapestry of healing that no words could capture. Sandra's presence was steady, a steadying force that offered more than comfort. It was a lifeline, a reminder that in the midst of darkness, connection and care could bring light. For Keanu, the kitchen was no longer just a place of solitude, but a haven where brokenness could be met with tenderness and where hope could quietly begin to grow. As they shared the first bites of breakfast, the simple act of eating together symbolized the return of something long missing: trust, companionship, and the courage to face a new day. The dawn outside continued to brighten, a silent witness to the healing unfolding inside, where love was baked into every cookie and poured into every cup of coffee. As the morning light grew stronger, the kitchen filled with warmth and soft conversation. The heavy silence that had once cloaked Keanu's home was replaced by gentle laughter and the comforting sounds of a shared meal. Sandra moved gracefully around the kitchen, tending to dishes and wiping counters. Her presence brought a sense of calm and safety that had been absent for so long. The smell of freshly baked cookies and sizzling bacon wrapped around them like a protective blanket, softening the edges of pain. Keanu took another slow breath, feeling the heaviness in his chest begin to lift. The darkness that had threatened to consume him was met now by the simple, steady light of care and friendship. He looked at Sandra with gratitude. In this kitchen, surrounded by the sensory details of everyday life, the warmth of the oven, the clatter of dishes, the rich aroma of coffee, he found a space to begin healing. Sandra caught his gaze and smiled softly. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the smallest acts can hold the greatest power. Just showing up, making coffee, baking cookies, that's where healing starts." Keanu nodded. "It's not about grand gestures or speeches. It's about presence, being seen, being cared for in the little moments." The kitchen, once a place of solitude, had transformed into a sanctuary. The contrast between the dark despair Keanu had faced and the light Sandra brought was stark and powerful. In that early morning light, hope was no longer a distant idea, but a tangible feeling woven through the smells, sounds, and warmth that surrounded them. Together, they shared more than a meal. They shared a moment of restoration, a beginning of repair that words alone could never achieve. The dawn outside brightened steadily, casting long, hopeful shadows. Inside, the kitchen held a sacred stillness, the quiet hum of healing in progress. After the morning light filled the kitchen, Sandra didn't rush or push for answers. She understood that words could sometimes be overwhelming, especially when pain was so fresh. Instead, she chose to simply exist alongside Keanu, offering her presence as a steady comfort. She moved quietly through the house, tidying up with gentle care. She opened windows that had been shut for months, allowing fresh air to circulate and sweep away the heaviness. The soft breeze whispered through the rooms, carrying with it a sense of renewal. Sandra put on gentle music, a playlist filled with soothing melodies that didn't demand attention but offered a peaceful backdrop. The soft notes mingled with the sounds of clinking dishes and quiet footsteps, creating an environment of calm and safety. Keanu watched her, the ordinary acts taking on extraordinary meaning. In those moments, he wasn't alone in his struggle. The simple fact of someone's presence beside him made the difference between surrender and survival. He reflected on how Sandra's compassionate quietness allowed him to feel safe enough to face the darkness. There were no expectations, no pressure to talk or explain. Just a warm, steady light that held space for his pain. The episode unfolded the profound truth that sometimes healing doesn't come from solutions or words, but from being seen and accompanied. Sandra's presence was transformative. It was the anchor that kept Keanu tethered to life. As the day went on, the atmosphere shifted. The heaviness began to lift, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of hope. The power of compassionate presence became clear. It was not in grand gestures, but in quiet solidarity that healing began. Sandra's presence was steady, unwavering, and patient. She didn't interrupt Keanu's silence or push him to speak when he wasn't ready. Instead, she simply stayed nearby, offering quiet companionship. She moved through the rooms, tidying the space with soft care. The clatter of dishes being washed, the gentle hum of the vacuum, and the faint rustling of curtains as she opened the windows created a rhythm that filled the emptiness with gentle life. The fresh air flowed in, carrying away the stale heaviness that had clung to the walls. Sandra's choice to let in the breeze was a quiet act of renewal, an invitation for change. In the background, soft music played, a mix of mellow piano and acoustic guitar. The melodies were calming and unobtrusive, wrapping the space in warmth without demanding attention. Keanu watched all this quietly. The normalcy of these simple acts contrasted sharply with the turmoil he'd been feeling inside. Yet, it was exactly this normalcy, this gentle care, that began to break through the despair. He thought about how presence alone, without judgment or pressure, could create a space safe enough to begin healing. Sandra wasn't trying to fix anything. She was simply there, a steady beacon in the storm. The power of such presence became clear. It wasn't about solving problems or finding answers. It was about witnessing pain and offering a hand to hold in the silence. Keanu reflected on the nights he had spent feeling utterly alone, and how Sandra's quiet companionship had been the difference between surrender and survival. The episode underscored this profound truth. Sometimes, what a person needs most is not advice, but simply someone to exist alongside them, to hold space and share the weight. As the hours passed, the room filled with a subtle warmth, a fragile but growing sense of safety. The healing that followed wasn't immediate, but the foundation had been laid. Sandra's compassionate presence was the beginning of a new chapter, a testament to the quiet power of love in its simplest form. As the day unfolded, Keanu found himself drawn into the rhythm of Sandra's presence. There was no need for words. Her actions spoke volumes. The gentle way she moved around the room, the soft hum of music, and the fresh air flowing through the open windows created a sanctuary from the darkness that had gripped him. And Keanu reflected deeply on how this quiet companionship became a lifeline. In those moments, he felt seen, not just for his successes or public image, but for his raw, vulnerable self. The simple act of someone staying, without expectation or judgment, allowed him to begin to lower the walls he had built. Sandra's presence became a sacred offering. She did not try to change or fix him. Instead, she offered acceptance, patience, and unwavering support. This was the kind of presence that transforms despair into hope, isolation into connection. The episode emphasized that healing is often less about words and more about the gift of simply being there. It's the comfort of knowing someone will stay through the silence, through the tears, through the pain. Keanu recalled nights when he felt like giving up, when the weight of loneliness was unbearable. It was the memory of Sandra's steady presence, the promise that she wouldn't abandon him, that kept him tethered to life. Sandra's compassionate acts, opening windows to let fresh air in, playing soft music to soothe the spirit, cleaning and organizing the space, were more than chores. They were acts of love that nurtured healing. Keanu realized that this kind of care is revolutionary in its simplicity. It doesn't require grand speeches or dramatic interventions. Sometimes, all that's needed is someone to exist alongside you, to share the silence and hold space. The kitchen, once heavy with despair, became a sanctuary filled with light and hope. The transformative power of compassionate presence was undeniable. As the day came to a close, Keanu felt a renewed sense of strength. The journey ahead was still long, but the foundation had been laid by love and presence. Sandra's unwavering companionship was a testament to the healing power of simply being there. For someone, for yourself, for humanity. After that night, something shifted between Sandra and Keanu. The heavy silence that had hung over their friendship was replaced by a new rhythm, one marked by steady presence and gentle care. Sandra didn't return to her own life as if nothing had happened. Instead, she began showing up every Tuesday without fail. At first, her visits were simple. She'd arrive with groceries, fresh fruits, vegetables, ingredients for meals, to bring a touch of normalcy back into Keanu's life. Sometimes she'd bring movies, light-hearted films to offer a break from the heaviness. Other times, she'd come just to sit quietly, sharing the space without pressure or expectation. Keanu resisted initially. The pain he carried made it hard to accept help. He was used to handling things alone, to wearing a mask that hid his struggles. The idea of needing consistent support felt foreign and uncomfortable. But Sandra was patient. She never pushed or demanded. She simply showed up, week after week, with the same quiet determination. Her presence was a steady beacon in the uncertainty. Gradually, Keanu began to accept her visits. The routine became a lifeline, a reminder that he wasn't invisible, that someone cared deeply and consistently. Their friendship deepened beyond the Hollywood spotlight. It moved into a sacred space of trust, vulnerability, and healing. This wasn't about careers or publicity. It was about human connection at its purest. The Tuesday visits became a ritual, a promise kept. Each one was a small act of love, a thread weaving hope and strength into the fabric of Keanu's life. Sandra's consistent support showed that healing doesn't always come in big moments. Sometimes it's found in the simplicity of showing up, bringing groceries, sharing a laugh, or sitting quietly when words fail. This rhythm became a powerful theme in their story, the transformative power of consistent, compassionate presence. As the weeks turned into months, the Tuesday visits became an anchor in Keanu's life, a steady rhythm that broke through the lingering silence and shadows. Each time Sandra arrived, it was a quiet reminder that he was not invisible, that someone cared enough to show up, week after week, no matter what. Sandra never made a show of it. There was no grand announcement or dramatic fanfare. She simply appeared, as if part of the fabric of the day, a comforting constant in a world that often felt overwhelming and unpredictable. Sometimes she brought groceries, fresh fruits, vegetables, and simple meals that could be warmed or shared together. The food was more than sustenance. It was a tangible expression of care, a way to nurture both body and spirit. Other times, she carried a stack of DVDs or a streaming device preloaded with movies they both enjoyed. These offerings weren't just distractions. They were moments of lightness, of laughter and shared memories that momentarily lifted the heaviness. Many visits passed in silence, where no words were spoken, but everything was understood. Sandra would sit quietly beside Keanu, her presence a gentle light filling the room, creating a safe space where he could simply be. Without expectation, without judgment, Keanu wrestled with accepting this ongoing support. His pain and pride made vulnerability difficult. Accepting help felt like surrendering control. Yet Sandra's patient persistence never pushed or pressured him. She respected his pace, allowing their friendship to evolve naturally and authentically. Gradually, the walls Keanu had built around himself began to soften. The trust that had frayed was carefully mended, stitch by stitch, through acts of kindness and consistent presence. Their connection deepened far beyond the surface-level friendships common in Hollywood circles. It became a bond forged in shared struggle, quiet companionship, and unwavering commitment, a lifeline in the truest sense. The simplicity of the Tuesday visits was their greatest strength. It wasn't about grand gestures or solutions to complex problems. It was about showing up, consistently, and with an open heart. Keanu reflected often on how these visits slowly rebuilt not only his trust in others, but also his faith in himself. The steady support rekindled a sense of worth and hope that had long been buried beneath layers of pain. Sandra's commitment revealed a profound truth, that consistent kindness and presence have the power to transform a life. They become anchors in storms, bridges over dark waters. This chapter of their story highlighted a lesson often overlooked, that healing is rarely sudden or spectacular. Instead, it is a journey walked together, one small, steady step at a time. With each passing Tuesday, the visits became more than routine. They became essential. The rhythm of Sandra's presence stitched itself into the fabric of Keanu's healing journey. The simple fact that someone was coming week after week was a lifeline when everything else felt uncertain. Sometimes Keanu would open the door reluctantly, wary of the vulnerability that came with accepting help. Other times he'd be waiting, the faintest glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. No matter how he greeted her, Sandra was patient, never forcing the moment, always offering unconditional support. Their time together wasn't filled with heavy conversations or demands to feel better. Instead, it was marked by shared silences, quiet moments of comfort, and gentle distractions. They'd watch movies, cook meals, or just sit side by side, the unspoken understanding between them more powerful than words. Keanu reflected on how this consistent, simple presence helped rebuild his fractured trust, not just in others, but in himself. Each visit was a reminder that he mattered, that he was seen beyond the public image and the pain. Sandra's ongoing care became a beacon of stability and love. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest gift isn't a solution, but the promise to show up and stay, no matter what. Their friendship grew stronger, transcending the glitz of Hollywood to touch the deepest parts of their humanity. The Tuesday Project wasn't just about rescue. It was about companionship, resilience, and hope. This chapter of their story stood as a testament to the transformative power of simple, consistent kindness. It showed that healing isn't a solitary act, but a shared journey made possible through unwavering presence. Sandra had noticed how the days seemed to blend together for Keanu, how the heaviness often kept him inside, disconnected from the world outside his walls. She understood that healing was not just about quiet presence. It needed sparks of life, reasons to get up and engage with the world again. One Tuesday morning, she arrived with bags, filled not just with groceries, but with small pots of flowers and herbs. She carried soil, gardening tools, and a hopeful smile. "Today," she said, "we're going to bring some life to this garden." Keanu looked at the plants with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. The garden had been neglected, just like so much else. But Sandra's enthusiasm was contagious. She showed him how to plant the seeds and tend the soil, explaining the rhythms of growth and renewal. As they worked side by side, the sun warmed their backs, and the air filled with the fresh scent of earth and greenery. There was something grounding about digging in the soil, feeling it crumble between fingers, and knowing that these small plants would grow with care and patience. Sandra's gentle encouragement turned the gardening into a quiet ritual. Each plant became a symbol of hope, a tangible reason to care, to nurture, to get up in the morning and tend to something alive. Keanu felt a flicker of something long forgotten. Purpose. The act of planting, of caring for living things, began to break through the fog of his despair. But Sandra wasn't done. A few weeks later, she showed up with paint cans in ridiculous colors: bright sunshine yellow, ocean blue, and forest green. "We're repainting your living room," she declared with a grin. Keanu laughed, both at the absurdity and the daring of the idea. The thought of turning his somber, shadowed space into something so bright seemed almost impossible. Sandra's energy was infectious. She insisted they paint together, throwing caution and neatness to the wind. The two of them covered walls, floors, and even themselves with splashes of color. Their clumsy strokes and bursts of laughter filled the room with a new kind of life, the first real joy Keanu had felt in months. The paint-covered floor and colorful walls became a symbol of renewal and shared humanity. In this messy, joyful chaos, Keanu rediscovered laughter and lightness. The simple act of creating something together brought healing in a way no words could. As the paintbrushes danced across the walls, the air filled with a mix of vibrant colors and laughter. Keanu and Sandra were far from artists, but that didn't matter. The clumsy, uneven strokes and the accidental splatters of paint on their clothes were part of the magic. Sandra's eyes sparkled with delight as she watched Keanu smile genuinely for the first time in what felt like ages. "You're better at this than you think," she teased gently, handing him another brush. Keanu chuckled, the sound warm and freeing. "I'm just trying not to ruin the whole room." Their laughter echoed through the house, breaking down invisible barriers and dissolving the heaviness that had clung to Keanu for so long. The living room, once a space of shadows and silence, was now a canvas of hope and transformation. Sandra stepped back to admire their work, the walls alive with ridiculous bright colors that seemed to laugh alongside them. "This room needed some sunshine," she said softly. Keanu nodded, his eyes reflecting a newfound lightness. "It's hard to believe this is my living room." The painting wasn't just about changing the color of the walls. It was about reclaiming joy, breaking free from the grip of despair and embracing the messy, imperfect beauty of life. Sandra's insistence on this creative act was a breakthrough, a moment where Keanu realized healing could be playful, messy, and filled with laughter. It was a reminder that hope often comes in unexpected forms. As the paint dried and the sun rose higher, the room seemed to breathe new life. The colors were a testament to resilience, a symbol of the journey from darkness to light. Keanu looked at Sandra with gratitude. "Thank you for bringing this into my life, for reminding me that joy can be found, even in the smallest moments." Sandra smiled warmly. "Sometimes all it takes is a little color to brighten the soul." Together they stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by their handiwork, a living, breathing symbol of hope, renewal, and shared humanity. In the days that followed, the brightly painted living room became a sanctuary of renewal for Keanu. Every glance at the vibrant walls reminded him that transformation was possible, that light could break through even the darkest moments. Sandra continued to nurture this new chapter with small, consistent acts of care. She tended to the garden alongside Keanu, watching as the flowers and herbs took root and began to bloom. Each new sprout was a sign of life's resilience and a reminder that growth, though slow, was always happening. Keanu found himself rising earlier, drawn by the sunlight filtering through the colorful windows. The kitchen smelled faintly of freshly brewed coffee and baking cookies, a sensory embrace that grounded him in the present. The painting and gardening weren't just distractions. They were powerful symbols of hope and healing. They reminded Keanu that recovery was not about perfection, but about embracing the messy, imperfect process of life. Through laughter-filled painting sessions and quiet mornings in the garden, Sandra and Keanu deepened their friendship. They moved beyond the surface, exploring vulnerability, resilience, and the courage to face life's challenges together. The breakthrough in the living room became a turning point, a tangible expression of what their friendship had become, a source of strength, joy, and renewal. For Keanu, the colorful walls and thriving garden were daily reminders that, even after the darkest nights, dawn always comes. And sometimes it arrives painted in bright, ridiculous colors, with the laughter of a friend nearby. This chapter of their story illustrated the profound healing power of creativity, companionship, and the simple courage to show up and paint a new beginning. One quiet afternoon, as they sat surrounded by the bright colors of the freshly painted living room and the soft green of the garden just outside, Keanu turned to Sandra with a question that had been on his mind for a while. His voice was gentle, but filled with genuine curiosity. "Sandra, why do you keep coming back? Why do you keep showing up every Tuesday, every time I'm struggling?" Sandra looked at him with steady eyes, her expression soft but certain. "Because when someone is drowning, You don't stop to ask why, she said simply. You don't question if they deserve help or if it's convenient for you. You jump in and you help. Keanu absorbed her words slowly, the simplicity and depth settling in like a quiet revelation. It's not about obligation or duty, then? No, Sandra replied. It's about love. Real love. The kind that doesn't wait for perfect timing or easy answers. The kind that just shows up, no matter what. The room seemed to hold its breath as the weight of her words sank in. Keanu realized that the constant presence Sandra offered wasn't about fixing him or making things better on her schedule. It was about standing beside him through whatever came, without conditions. Keanu, despite being at his weight, despite being beat up, Sandra continued, I see you, Keanu. Not the actor, not the public image, but you, the person beneath it all. And that person matters. Keanu's gaze softened. Sometimes I struggle to see that myself. Sandra reached out, her hand gently brushing his. That's why I'm here. To remind you that your worth isn't tied to success or fame. It's intrinsic. You are valuable just because you are you. She looked directly into his eyes, the conviction in her voice clear. The world needs you in it, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. Keanu felt a stirring deep inside, a shift in how he viewed himself and his place in the world. These words, spoken so simply and sincerely, began to reshape his understanding of love, friendship, and his own value. For years, he had tied his worth to his achievements and public recognition. But Sandra's unwavering belief in him, rooted in acceptance rather than accolades, offered a new foundation. The moment between them was profound, a turning point in their friendship and in Keanu's journey toward healing. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about embracing his true self and the love that comes from being seen and valued as that person. Keanu sat quietly, absorbing Sandra's words. For so many years, his identity had been tied to his work, his public image, and the weight of expectations placed on him by others and himself. That burden had often made him feel like he had to prove his worth, over and over, just to be seen. But here, in this colorful room, filled with warmth and fresh air from open windows, a different truth was beginning to settle in. Sandra's presence was like a steady lighthouse, constant, unwavering. You know, she said softly, true friendship isn't about what someone can do for you or what you can do for them. It's about showing up when it's hardest, especially when no one else does. Keanu nodded slowly, the honesty of her words resonating deep within. I've spent so much time trying to be strong for everyone else, but I forgot what it means to let someone be strong for me. Sandra's smile was gentle and understanding. That's the heart of it. Friendship is a two-way street. But sometimes, one person needs to give more. And that's okay. It's love in its purest form, patient, persistent, unconditional. She took a breath and continued, I don't come around expecting anything in return. I come because I care. Because you matter. Not for your fame, not for your achievements, but simply because you are you. Keanu's gaze softened, and he looked away momentarily, feeling overwhelmed by the depth of her words. It's hard sometimes to believe that, to feel worthy without having to prove something. Sandra reached out and took his hand gently. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, least of all yourself. Your worth is inherent, intrinsic. The world needs people like you, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. The room felt warm, the space between them charged with unspoken understanding, trust, and acceptance. Keanu realized this moment was more than just a conversation. It was a gift, a new way of seeing himself and the relationships that truly matter. Sandra's voice softened further. When someone is drowning, You don't stop to ask why or how. You jump in. You hold on tight. You don't let go. That's what real friends do. Keanu nodded slowly, a quiet smile beginning to break through his usual reserve. Thank you for jumping in, for not letting go. Sandra smiled back, eyes shining with quiet strength. I'll keep jumping in as many times as it takes. In that exchange, Keanu found a new definition of friendship, one rooted in presence, acceptance, and love that transcends conditions. Docent exom, simply pari, will sich. Keanu's eyes met Sandra's, the depth of their shared understanding speaking volumes beyond words. In that moment, something within him shifted, an awakening to a truth he had long struggled to embrace. The love and friendship Sandra offered were not transactional or conditional. They were gifts, freely given, asking only for openness in return. He reflected on how often he had tied his self-worth to achievements, roles, and public recognition. But Sandra's presence and words unraveled that narrative, replacing it with something far more enduring and powerful. The world needs you, she repeated softly. Not for what you do, but for who you are. Because you notice things others miss. Because you're kind when it's easier not to be. Because you make the world a little gentler just by being in it. Keanu felt those words settle deep inside him, grounding him in a new reality. It wasn't about perfection or accomplishments anymore. It was about being enough, simply as himself. Sandra continued, You don't have to save the world or be extraordinary. Sometimes, just being present, just being real, that's what changes everything. The room was filled with a gentle stillness, heavy with the weight of this revelation. Keanu understood that this moment marked a turning point, not just in their friendship, but in how he would live his life moving forward. He smiled quietly, a warmth spreading through him. You've given me a gift I never knew I needed, the permission to be myself, to be vulnerable, to be loved without conditions. Sandra squeezed his hand gently. And I'll keep reminding you, every Tuesday, every day. Because true friendship is about showing up, over and over again. In that space, surrounded by the bright colors of renewal and the fresh scents of the garden, Keanu felt a profound peace. The burdens he had carried so long began to lift, replaced by the quiet strength of belonging. Their story, a testament to the transformative power of love and presence, offered hope to anyone who has ever felt unseen or unworthy. Sandra's words echoed in the stillness, a call to all. You matter, just as you are. And with that, a new chapter began. One built on the foundation of true friendship, acceptance, and the courage to simply be. Years after Sandra's unwavering support and the Tuesday project that saved his life, Keanu found himself carrying forward the lessons she had taught him. The simple truth of showing up, of being present without judgment or expectation, had become a guiding light in his own life. He realized that the healing he had received was not meant to be kept to himself. It was something to be shared. Keanu began reaching out to others who were struggling in silence, those lost and isolated in their own private battles. He understood better than most that pain often hides beneath the surface, invisible to the world, but crushing to the person who carries it. One day, he met a young actor named David. David was barely 22, new to the industry, but already weighed down by rejection and self-doubt. Keanu noticed the familiar signs, the tired eyes, the withdrawn posture, the quiet stillness that spoke of someone trying to disappear from the inside out. Instead of offering advice or trying to solve David's problems, Keanu simply sat with him. He bought him a coffee, not because either of them particularly needed it, but because sometimes a shared moment is enough. A reason to exist alongside someone who feels invisible. For 3 hours, Keanu listened as David poured out his fears, frustrations, and feelings of not belonging. There was no judgment, No pressure, just presence, just care. This simple act echoed the same compassion Sandra had shown him during his darkest times. Keanu saw in David the same need for connection, for someone to say, "You matter, just as you are." David's story didn't end there. Inspired by that encounter and the kindness he received, he began a support group for young actors struggling with rejection and the pressures of the industry. He called it Tuesday Talks, a tribute to the steady, loving presence that had made all the difference. Keanu's heart swelled with pride knowing that Sandra's lessons had multiplied, creating a ripple effect of kindness and support that extended far beyond their own lives. The simple act of showing up had grown into a movement, a testament to the power of love to spread, to heal, and to transform. The Tuesday Talks support group quickly became a sanctuary for many young actors grappling with the harsh realities of the entertainment world. David, transformed by the kindness he had received, created a space where vulnerability was embraced and judgment was left outside the door. Each week, new faces arrived, seeking comfort, understanding, and the simple assurance that they were not alone. Keanu often reflected on that pivotal night when Sandra had chosen to show up for him. The small acts of care, the groceries, the presents, the listening, had saved his life. It wasn't a dramatic rescue, but a steady, unwavering companionship that made all the difference. He understood deeply that healing was never a solitary journey. It was a shared path, one paved with compassion, presence, and relentless kindness. Inspired by Sandra's example, Keanu expanded his own version of the Tuesday Project. He reached out beyond the Hollywood bubble, offering presents to homeless veterans he saw on street corners, neighbors wrestling with grief and hardship, and children facing bullying in the parks where he walked. He never sought to fix anyone's problems or offer easy solutions. Instead, he provided something far more valuable: himself. His steady presence was a balm, a light in the dark, a reminder that someone cared enough to stay. Keanu recounted quiet moments that left lasting impact: the slow conversations with a veteran who felt forgotten, the shared silence with a neighbor navigating divorce, the gentle smile offered to a lonely child. Each encounter was a thread in a growing tapestry of connection and hope. He witnessed the ripple effect of kindness firsthand. One simple act inspired another, creating a chain reaction of love and healing that spread far beyond what he had imagined. Sandra's lessons had planted seeds that blossomed into something extraordinary. The power of showing up over and over proved revolutionary, not just for Keanu, but for all those touched by his compassion. His journey stood as a testament to a profound truth: love isn't always loud or grand. Often, it's quiet and consistent, a presence that speaks louder than words. Keanu's story illustrated how simple acts of kindness could multiply, transforming lives and communities one Tuesday at a time. As the years unfolded, Keanu's commitment to the simple, powerful act of showing up deepened in ways he never expected. What had started as Sandra's steadfast presence in his darkest hour had blossomed into a movement of compassion that stretched far beyond their own lives. Each Tuesday visit, each quiet conversation, each moment of shared silence was a stitch in a vast tapestry of healing and connection. People who once felt isolated, invisible, or overwhelmed by despair found renewed strength through the ripple effect of kindness. Keanu often reflected on how Sandra's unwavering presence had laid the foundation for all that followed. She hadn't come to fix or save, she had come to be there. That lesson, simple yet profound, became the guiding principle for how he lived and loved. He carried that lesson into every encounter, whether with a struggling actor wrestling with self-doubt, a homeless veteran haunted by memories, or a neighbor grappling with loss. His presence became a lifeline, a beacon that said, "You are not alone." The story of Tuesday Talks inspired others to start their own projects of care, sparking waves of quiet, consistent kindness that spread through communities near and far. What began as one phone call and a promise to show up became a movement, grounded in love, empathy, and human connection. Keanu's personal journey, from the depths of despair to a place of hope and purpose, stood as a testament to the transformative power of compassionate presence. His life became a living example that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. He often shared this message with those he met, that everyone has the capacity to make a difference simply by being there for another person. That true strength lies not in grand gestures, but in the quiet commitment to stand beside someone when they need it most. The world needs more Tuesdays, he would say, more moments of showing up, more acts of love and consistency. Sandra's gift to him was more than a rescue. It was a call to action. And Keanu answered, with a heart full of gratitude, courage, and an unyielding commitment to pay it forward. In the echoes of those Tuesdays, in the laughter and tears shared, in the lives touched and changed, the power of human connection shone brilliantly, a beacon of hope in a world too often shadowed by loneliness. Keanu and Sandra sat side by side in the softly lit podcast studio. Their eyes held the weight of the years they had shared, years marked by struggle, healing, and the steady power of friendship. Turning toward the microphone, they addressed the audience with a quiet sincerity that resonated deep within the room. "Everyone listening," Keanu began, his voice calm but filled with heartfelt urgency. "We live in a world where suffering often hides in plain sight. People around us may be battling their own storms, feeling invisible, lost, or utterly alone. But the truth is, we all have the power to notice, to truly see, and to show up in ways that can change lives." Sandra nodded thoughtfully, her gaze warm yet serious. Saving lives isn't about grand gestures or dramatic, headline-making moments. It's about the quiet, consistent presence, the small acts of kindness and compassion that say, "I see you. You are not alone in this." Keanu's tone grew steady, layered with sincerity. Love isn't just a feeling or a fleeting moment. It's something you do every day, especially when it's hard, when it's inconvenient, when you don't have all the answers or the perfect words. That's when love matters most. They exchanged a look full of understanding. Their story was a small part of a much larger call to action, a ripple reaching out to invite everyone to participate in this movement of care. Sandra added softly, "What Sandra did for me, and what I strive to do for others, is a simple invitation to be present, to listen without judgment, to hold space with patience and compassion, to show up repeatedly even when it feels difficult." Keanu leaned forward, voice firm but gentle. "This isn't about heroism or saving the day in spectacular ways. It's about humanity, the quiet power we each carry to change a life by simply being there, by being steady and caring." Their words settled in the air with a gentle weight, inviting not only attention but action. Sandra smiled with tenderness. "You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes the most powerful gift is your presence, your willingness to be with someone in their pain." Keanu nodded in agreement. "So here's a question for you, whoever you are listening. Who will you show up for this week? Who in your life needs you to be their steady heart, their witness, their friend?" This invitation was simple but profound, a challenge to everyone to create their own Tuesday projects, their own commitments to consistent care and kindness in the lives around them. The studio seemed to pulse with possibility, a shared hope that these stories would inspire something real and lasting. Sandra's eyes softened as she continued, "It's easy to overlook the people silently struggling around us. They don't always shout for help or wave a sign. Sometimes their pain is invisible, hidden behind smiles or silence. But if we pay close enough attention, if we choose to truly see, we can find ways to reach out." Keanu nodded. That's why it's so important to break the habit of walking past suffering, to resist the urge to ignore what's hard to witness. Real change happens when we show up consistently, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Sandra's voice was steady and warm. There's a misconception that saving a life requires a heroic act, but often it's the quiet, persistent presence, the simple acts of showing up day after day that make the greatest difference. Keanu added, "Love is a verb. It's something we do every single day, especially when it's hard to do. When life gets messy, complicated, or painful, that's when love matters most. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it." Sandra smiled gently. "You don't have to have all the answers or know exactly what to say. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is just be there. Listen, hold space, offer your time and your heart." Keanu's eyes searched the camera, reaching out to every listener. This is a call to action, a challenge to be the person who notices, to be the person who shows up, who stays, who cares. Because sometimes, that's all someone needs to keep going. Sandra's voice softened further. Who in your life needs you this week? Who are you going to show up for? It could be a friend, a family member, a neighbor, or even a stranger. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Sometimes just sitting quietly with someone who's hurting can change everything. Keanu nodded with quiet conviction. Creating your own Tuesday project doesn't require special training or resources. It requires presence, compassion, and courage. The courage to see, to care, and to act. Their words lingered, wrapping around the audience like a warm embrace. The message was clear. The power to save lives and transform communities lies within each of us, in the simple but profound act of showing up. Sandra concluded, "If this story has touched you, if it has opened your heart even a little, I invite you to take that first step, to reach out, to be there, to be love in action." Keanu smiled, the warmth in his eyes reflecting hope. Because every Tuesday, somewhere in the world, someone is choosing to live instead of give up. All because another person decided to care. The studio fell into a gentle silence, filled with the promise of change and the ripple effect of kindness. Keanu's voice softened as he reflected, "I know from my own journey how easy it is to feel invisible, lost in the noise of the world. But there is power in being seen, in someone simply showing up and saying, 'I'm here with you.' That presence can be the difference between giving up and holding on." Sandra nodded in agreement, her eyes glistening with emotion. It's not about fixing someone's pain or having all the answers. It's about bearing witness. It's about creating space for healing to begin, simply by being present and caring without conditions. Keanu leaned forward, earnest and hopeful. We all have that power, the power to make a difference in someone's life through consistent kindness. It's not about the size of the gesture, but the heart behind it. Love is something we do every day, especially when it's hard. Sandra smiled warmly. So I ask you now, who will you show up for this week? Who needs your steady heart, your presence, your kindness? It could be someone you know well, or a stranger who needs a little light in their darkness. Keanu's gaze was steady and inviting. Creating your own Tuesday project can start small. A phone call, a visit, a meal shared, or simply listening without judgment. These acts ripple outward, touching lives in ways we often never see. Their words hung in the air, a call to action and a beacon of hope. They closed with a shared wish that the audience would carry forward the legacy of compassion, transforming the world one Tuesday at a time.